Hey guys, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about the next balance patch for Kill Team and how it might set the tone for the rest of the edition. I've got my handy little notebook with all my opinions in it. Let's get talking. We can't really begin to discuss the effects that the balance patch might have without first sort of addressing the elephant in the room, which is sanctifiers. I mean, a lot of other, much larger, probably much more experienced players and YouTubers than me have already, opined upon how busted the sanctifiers are. I do think, although they are undoubtedly correct, counterplay will evolve over time as people learn how the team operate and really get into the nitty gritty. But I thought I would just discuss the top performing teams initially, certainly how I might approach dealing with sanctifiers and what I'd like to see out of the patch, even though Games Workshop doesn't have a particularly strong track record of day one nerfs. The backlash that's been prevalent over the last few weeks might spur them into action. We never know. We'll see in a few days anyway. But the main sort of the most egregious element of the Sanctifier's kit is the lead, the procession ability. And for anyone who hasn't heard about it yet, somehow, this is basically an out of activation move that is linked to the aura effect from the preacher, the orator, the main the main leader guy in the group has a bubble which he sort of projects, which is currently a 6-inch bubble, and he can move and then move the rest of his team with him based on whatever his action is. So if he moves, they can move. They could also charge, dash, reposition, all that jazz as well. So I do think, obviously, this has been baked into the team as a very core mechanic, and I can see thematically where they're going, and I do think as a sort of guiding principle, theme should almost come before balance. And balance can be achieved over time. I do think I would much rather have a team that felt like they were doing, they were acting on a theme, or they were acting out or fulfilling a power fantasy well, than a team that didn't. Kind of like the Scarpa rule is a really good example. The Scarpa rule with the dexterous team. Now, it's a bit strange that the team of like sundress monks gets to move faster than hyper evolved psychically active elves, but I think that the fantasy that they were trying to achieve was the zealot mob fantasy, nutters rolling down in a procession, as like a crazed horde, and I do think it probably feels that way when you're playing against them, but it's a little powerful. Make it that models have to be wholly within the aura range, because between moving down firing lines and moving around terrain, as well as fitting in there with the other sort of members of the team that might want to move up out of sequence, it creates some choices. I do think as well it would create counterplay, because obviously right now a 6-inch bubble, you could be a toe in on the 6-inch bubble, so essentially it's a 7-inch if you're going to say wholly within. There's so much room in that projected aura to avoid things like blast and avoid countermeasures like torrent and blast, things like that. So first of all, as a softly approach, which I do think the team might need a bit more than that, I would say like wholly within 6, maybe drop the aura down to 4 and keep it as just within. Probably achieves somewhere similar the same sort of the same sort of level. If not, if they were going to keep it the same, it might be a simpler sort of approach to just not allow it to be used in the first 10. So right now it's the alpha strike potential that is creating really sort of feels bad scenario. So if you knew that the first turn wasn't just going to be a catapult, that might sort of make the opinion, the feeling of how powerful a team is, a little sort of easier to bear. And also there's counterplay then, because obviously they can only stage up normally, and you've got your own staging to try and counter or predict where they're going to move, stuff like that. So that will kind of be my my first touch on the team. Limit the movement effects of lead the possession. If not, another approach could be treating the movement effects that the team takes advantage of as being in their own activation. What that means basically is if they dash, then they can't dash in their later activation. If they do a normal move, they can no longer do a normal move, so on and so forth. That might be another way to sort of approach them. So one of the other sort of feel bad mechanics is currently the gunners can benefit from the sermon and severe at the same time, so they can start their move. I think it's something like they start the move in sermon range, move out of sermon range, then they get severe on their guns for spreading the faith, and then they also get the benefits of being in sermon. So it's kind of like a really really reliable melter or plasma, again, which given the movements, you've got a guy with a melter gun who can move the majority of the board in the first turn, certainly be staged up to threaten anyone on your team in that second turn, and he's got a super reliable melter gun. It's not just Brood Brothers, for instance. You might move up with Insidious, and then you might move with a pre-game move, so you've spent a lot of resources there to get a similar amount of movement, and then when it comes to firing, hitting on 4-ups. Another example of it being slightly overtuned might be Blaze is currently D3, so you get hit by a Blaze, turn up on 2 usually, that's where it all kicks off. So you get hit by a Blaze token, that's potentially 9 damage. That's 3d3 if you don't put it out. So you've got like a semi-stun mechanic, because you've got to spend an APL to put it out, combined with 3 times 3d3 essentially, which is wild if you consider Plague Marines get 1 damage a turn for a tick on their poison. I really don't understand why Blaze is so powerful. Thematically feels great, setting fire to stuff, running around, crazy preachers, really cool. But maybe that needs to be redressed somehow. I'd either change the stun mechanic, or if they're going to keep the stun mechanic, tone down the damage, possibly. They also get a Just a Scratch, which is thematically cool. Like it's themed like their faith is protecting them. Again, really cool power fantasy. But I do feel like the Just a Scratch faith kind of ability should be linked to sermon. If their faith is going to be protecting them, then surely in the range of the preacher with the holy lights and the aura of of holy power, then that is where that would occur. To just be able to just pull it out your arse, especially on a team that has 4 or 5 chainswords, like marine chainswords. You can then turn what will be a trading combat, when reacting into a favourable trade, if not a win. Maybe my fix for that, or my sort of toning down of that, would be linking that ability to the sermon, because it makes more sense both thematically and in terms of the rules as well. So Goremongers, I've thought a lot less about the Goremongers, to be honest. I do think innately being such a skew team, by being a skew team in terms of their being all melee, it will be more difficult for them, regardless, to win. To win a 4-round tournament. So I kind of think they're sort of spiking into one phase of the game does create a kind of self-balancing in a way, certainly as well. They will struggle into elites, and any team play Marines with poison, play guys only got to hit them with a bolter, max out 2 shots, do 8 damage with the bolter, and then the poison's going to finish them off, so the poison ticks, blaze from the sanctifiers, any kind of poison grenades, things like that. They are susceptible. There's counter. For me, there's a more clear counterplay than there is with the sanctifiers. So I do think they need less of a sort of touch. I would like to see maybe. So right now, as it stands, you can use your Gore tank twice. Maybe limit it so it's twice full stop, because I think a lot of what's happening now is the Goremongers will be running in, they'll benefit from 2 pops of the Gore tank, they might kill an enemy, fill the Gore tank back up, and then on the reaction heal, so they might heal twice maybe, and that feels probably a little bit feels bad if if you're playing a team that has to chip them down, things like that. So maybe if they were gonna, go with a sort of really simple approach, I possibly just limit them to 2 uses of the Gore tank, which in the grand scheme of things, I think they would play very similarly to the way they do now, but there'd be less taking advantage of reactions. I feel like they're taking advantage of the reactions at the moment for the double heal is a little bit much. Okay, so the other top performing teams at the moment in the meta, according to the stats, are Brew Brothers and Chaos Cults. So for Chaos Cults, I don't have any experience playing with them or against them. However, they did win. So my local, the biggest tournament local to me is the Manchester GT. And they did win that, I believe, based off my very shoddy memory. They do sort of, they've been buffed. I've heard whispers that the problem is currently the Terrors are both too powerful offensively and defensively. So maybe they could just pick one avenue of attack, or even when they mutate, dictate, this has got hardened chitin, this has got killy claws or whatever. But I don't really have the experience under my belt to make a real sort of educated guess on how to deal with Chaos Cults. However, I do main Brew Brothers. That's my they're my guys. Beating them at the moment. But Brew Brothers, although they've got a high win rate, the pick rate isn't, it isn't super high. And certainly the American meta looks like much less favourable for them. I play them a lot, so obviously there could be bias here. I feel like there is avenues of counterplay that are much clearer than, say, Warp Coven, for instance, who are just dominating at the moment with the Orcs still, and certainly Sanctifiers. However, I do concede that the current meta choice, which is the Magus, is a little how can I put this? It's a little non-interactive. It ignores piercing flat, so the Magus allows you don't get wounded, and she also ignores piercing flat for the whole team. And she managed to avoid the piercing crits kind of blanket nerf that a lot of the old ignore piercing rules got. So they've maintained that sort of ignore piercing non-interactivity, which is it's kind of it is kind of unfun. If you run Vespids, for example, just going, oh yeah, well, I turn your army rule off, is hardly a big brain play, is it? So I can understand why maybe that element of the kit certainly could do with balancing a balanced look, maybe. However, I don't feel like the overall power level of the team would cope very well with a straight nerf, because right now, if you're running the Lizard or the Primus, it is 100% a step down from the Magus. She has a non-shooting attack, so she has a psychic attack as well, which is also very non-interactive. So because it's a psychic action, it allows for a couple of different things that happen. First of all, it allows for you to shoot into combat. It's not a shooting attack, that's why it allows you to shoot into combat, but it allows you to kind of shoot the attack into combat, as well as it can be used without breaking silence. So I could see possible nerfs being ignore piercing becomes ignore piercing. Ignore piercing doesn't ignore piercing crits, and possibly turning that psychic action into a psychic shooting action, just like the Warpcore sorcerers had done to them. Either a silent one that behaves like a sniper rifle, or even just it becoming a psychic shooting action in its own right is a pretty big nerf, because we can no longer shoot it into combat, which means you're playing Angels of Death, they get in amongst you and start ripping and tearing. Well, you've got no way now when they're in combat to deal with them. So I think just making that a psychic shooting action in its own right would probably do the trick, even if it can still be done with from silence. Thematically, that makes sense as well. So with the Brew Brothers, I definitely consider taking away from one leader and giving to the others. I do think buffing the Patriarch would be a good idea, because in terms of power fantasy, he is he's the key player. He's the most fun. Everyone knows he's the most fun, even though he's not the best or the most powerful. It'd be nice to bring him out in a sort of a tournament setting as well. I'd buff his crits up to 7. He's on 6 anyway, so him instant killing like shitty mooks isn't going to break the game. And 2-shotting a Marine also means that you move him up the board. You're not just going to get mobbed by Marines who are going to double parry you out and kill you anyway. So I think boosting his damage up to 7 probably would be a good idea. Damage up to 7. Primus, I'm not too sure. He is alright, he's fun. He just kind of doesn't shine as well as the Magus in a support role, or the Patriarch in a in a combat role. So definitely think the Primus could maybe take a look. Maybe he's supposed to be a tactician in general, so maybe another sort of APL manipulation kind of element or something like that. I think we've talked about the most sort of obvious meta state sort of issues that are currently occurring within the game, and although I don't feel like they may be addressed this patch, we've at least come up with some possible solutions moving forwards. But I think one thing that's kind of gonna have a bigger macro level impact is what I'm calling like the normal guys, or the need for like a normal dudes patch. So as it stands, we have a lot of bolt-on kill teams for the Inquisitorial agents that are being allowed to languish. Things like Imperial Navy Breachers, Exaction Squad, Kazakin, Vet Guard. Yeah. So these sort of bolt-on teams that the Inquisitorial agents like to take advantage of are restricted in their power level. Now, Vet Guard have had a pretty decent uplift, but certainly the other teams have not. And how they are approached, or how they're treated in this next balance patch, because it's the final balance patch before some of these teams become declassified, will have a really telling or a really impactful effect, I think, on how all sort of teams will be treated in the classification process. So this is why I think it's really important. Are we going to end up with like Warhammer Legend teams where we have like haves and have-nots in terms of balance, or are they going to deliver on sort of what was proposed initially, and we're still going to get meaningful balance updates for teams that are no longer classified? Because certainly I know in my local scene, I know people who poured their heart and souls into their Eldar Corsairs, or the Kazakin and so on, and they want to continue to play with the teams, knowing that they're going to sort of at least be able to have an even chance on the battlefield. So ultimately, I do think the normal dude patch needs to redress these balance issues, whether that's through changing the way the requisition teams work in Inquisitorial agents, or changing parts of the teams that the Inquisitorial agents can't take advantage of, like equipment or certain. So how these balance changes come into effect in this patch, certainly with the amount of time that the devs have had to identify these issues and realize that these teams need an uplift, how these affect the game will be in a couple of ways. So it will give us a really good idea of how declassification will affect a team and its balance, and how willing the devs are to give teams that are declassified an uplift and a real sort of redress in the rules. Adversely, Warp Coven are sort of on the other end of the spectrum. They've been cracked for a long time. They've been cracked since the new edition began. They've been toned down a little, but clearly still overperforming. So it'll also be a good example of how willing the devs are to change the rules in terms of reigning in power. It'll be interesting to see if these declassified teams end up a bit like the old Forge World range from in 40k. You had a lot of tournaments banning declassification because the Forge World rules writers were not in sync. They weren't sort of under the same balance limitations as the wider 40k team. So you had like wild variances in power between units with the Forge World range. So it would be interesting if we so it will be interesting to see if we end up with a similar sort of polarizing effect upon declassification. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I am working on things in the background, some graphics, kind of bat rep stuff, and some painting stuff as well, to try and create videos that provide a little more value than just talking head, rules commentary and stuff like that. But stick with me. Hopefully I'll get that stuff done soon. Cheers. Take care, guys.